Okay, welcome back to Day to Day Dev. I am Keith Franks of Cutlass Board Games, and joining me as always is Steve Dee of Tin Star Games.
Hello.
And part of I guess the industry standard these days for a game release is to run through Kickstarter. Both Steve and I have run a few in our time, and we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about some Kickstarter stuff. So I guess getting started with it, Steve, you've had a lot more things to do with your Kickstarter in the last couple of days than I have.
Yeah, so this this week I've been talking to the publishers, the printers, about finalizing our cards. Unfortunately, they're in Hong Kong, so every time we're like, these aren't exactly what we want, we have to pay another $150 for them to make a prototype and ship it out to us.
What's the time?
And
What's the turnaround time on that? It's like a week,
it's
right?
yeah, it's about a week, yeah.
That's painful.
Yeah, so but given that we only have one really deck of cards, it's not a huge thing. But it's worth understanding that every time you have a component in your game, you might have to do an extra 3 or 4 weeks back and forth to make sure it's right. And that includes things like the box and the insert and the rules. So if you're wondering why things, keep spiraling out of people's control, it's because all those little things need to be checked. And yeah, getting it sorted when you don't have your printer in your country takes a lot of extra time and effort.
Shipping is just slow in general.
Yeah. Look, and look, we are still in the post-COVID, or not even post-COVID, shipping crisis. So we are actually not using shipping for our delivery. We're getting our product when we have the final versions and have 1,000 copies. We're getting them flown over instead of them shipped over. Because it's basically works out the same. It's just and it's much faster. So it used to be back before COVID, you could get there was a lot of economies of scale involved. So when we first did Relics back in 2019, the cost for shipping 500 was I think $200 less than shipping 1,000.
Yeah, right.
And so and the printing costs weren't much more either. So, and the printing costs haven't gone up that much because that's still you're able to do at economies of scale. But shipping nowadays, it's basically just double. It's the cost of getting things out here is going up. 1,000 is twice as much as it costs to ship 500. So that's a huge concern, and that's why a lot of Kickstarters these days have started saying things like, we don't deliver to certain parts of the world. They just can't afford it.
Yeah, we almost just cut out a few places. When you look at the world map, there's some places that are kind of easy, and then some places that get harder for lots of different reasons.
Yep.
Fortunately, the most common regions that use Kickstarter are fine. The US being the largest chunk, being fine to ship to is very helpful. Australia is obviously fine to ship to. We're getting the stock anyway, which I guess is fine and not that scary. But we had trouble with Germany. Was a place that we had something we had to overcome. Obviously, we always have to deal with VAT and stuff with the UK. We have to worry about how we're going to figure those kind of things out. And then some other places can also be a struggle as well. But
I remember having trouble with, I think it was Norway.
Oh, okay.
But and also a lot of people have trouble sometimes with South America because there's a lot of really weird rules about taxation and imports. And again, you can't just go, I'll fly out to the guys on the port. You're talking to someone who's in another country on the other side of the earth, and they're just going, your game is misclassified, so it's going to cost you an extra several $1,000s to get it through our ports. So there's a lot of variables in those kind of things on international shipping. And we're seeing a lot of change as a result. So we had less numbers than we wanted with our Kickstarter because people didn't want to pay the postage, and we were like, that's as low as we can make it. We can't
Yeah.
afford to. A lot of times, in historically, postage has been free. Now they used to say this thing like people would prefer to pay $50 for and get free postage, then pay $30 and then pay $20 postage. Like the free postage feels better.
Mm.
But what was actually happening with the free postage is that they were really just going down to 40, and they were eating the customers, the companies were really taking a beating on postage in the olden days. And so a lot of Kickstarter backers got used to zero or no postage costs because they were all just being hidden. And for a lot of American and European companies, that was pretty easy because their postage costs were quite low, and they're
Yeah,
often printing in that
fulfilling
country.
locally. Yeah.
Yeah. But for us, we can't afford to do that in Australia. About a third of my customers are Australian,
That's
but
pretty good.
yeah, that's better than it was
That's higher than
originally.
average.
Yeah, with Relics it was about 20%.
Okay.
So yeah, but yeah, we
Did
can't
you
afford
have the score demoed in conventions overseas?
a little bit, but not much. It was
Okay.
mostly it was able to just present it here. We had a lot of videos and stuff like that. Um, and some advertising across all sorts of platforms, but we didn't have a large presence overseas. And that's another thing that's hard to do because, again, we had a lot of things going for us with a game that is small. It's just a pack of cards. So
Mm.
what we could do is go, here's the print and play. So we put the print and play into everyone's hands as much as we possibly could. I did some online conventions, which was still hanging around thanks to COVID. Running the game for people in Boston and other places at 3 a.m., which is always a bit weird.
Yeah, I've been there.
Um, but yeah, then we just relied on advertising. We're hoping to get some more copies into conventions now that we have physical copies. But
Mm.
yeah, it's tough.
Because I was interested, and the reason why I asked is that normally your my assumption of what your percentage of Australian backers would be more influenced because being local, we can have a pretty good convention presence
Yep.
and stuff like PAX. I went to TGX. I understand that TGX is going to continue to run on in the PAX off season, and a lot of
Right.
other smaller ones. And I imagine that's probably your best run on return. And then like all the digital marketing that we did for our campaign was heavily weighted to overseas
Right.
rather than in Australia. And I wonder if that's a thing of we should have been retargeting people that had been to these conventions and stuff like that and maybe saw the game.
Yeah,
But it's
we said all countries for our online advertising. Well, not every
interesting.
country, but we definitely included Australia in that. So,
Yeah.
but that's a really good example of things that you just don't know,
Yeah.
and then later on you go, oh, we could have changed that, could have changed that. There's a lot of black boxes in marketing and production where you just go, let's try that,
Yeah, we tried
and
some A/B testing, right? But the problem with
yep,
A/B testing is you throw up your ad A, and you go, okay, that's doing all right. I got a at lowest like 40 cents cost per click, which is not the best
hmm
I've ever had, but it's not terrible. And then we put up our B ad, and it was markedly worse. Like, okay, we'll scrap the B ad, and we'll stick with the A ad. And then you go, okay, I'm going to try another B, and you continue trying other Bs, but you could, in theory, be doing this infinitely and still never hit the correct thing.
that's right, yeah,
Like, so it's hard to, and like digital marketing might just like if there was a correct answer to the one thing you had to do to get funded, that might not have been the one thing. Like,
yeah,
so it's
yeah,
hard to really have the best one, but I feel like just being the least cost wasteful.
yeah,
Like being cost
yeah,
efficient doesn't necessarily mean you convert, but not wasting money is still better. I think
yeah.
it's such a hard economy in running a Kickstarter. I think.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really small industry. It's got smaller. Estimates were put that COVID basically dropped the Kickstarter market down about 25%. People were just spending less and less in terms of how much they spent and how many units they bought.
You know, risk investment because
Yeah,
Kickstarter is not technically a purchase; it's an investment that you maybe get a
mm,
game. But
yeah,
worse these days because there's just so many backflips. Like Mythic recently did a thing with like, oh yeah, by the way, we just can't send you your thing unless if you give us another $200 or something ridiculous. And people were like, why would I ever do this again?
Yep. Yeah, there's definitely a backlash growing. And a lot of people who over COVID were like, yeah, that's fine. Send me a big bunch of stuff. I'm at home all the time. And now looking at the big bunches of stuff that they ordered and going, I don't need another one of those. I'm back at work now, or I'm not
Yeah.
playing them.
Yeah.
We're also seeing the competitors to Kickstarter starting up as well.
Yeah. Game
But
founders starting to really
yeah,
bite into that slice of pie, which is nice to see.
and BackerKit is in the middle of launching its beta, I think, for its version. So they used to just be
Okay.
fulfillment agent, but now we're in a new sort of era. Like Kickstarter started what 2013, 2012, 2014, somewhere around there.
Something like that, yeah.
And it was really huge 2015, 2016, 2017. I think we're falling. It's going into a decline now. That doesn't mean your game isn't going to succeed, but it does mean we have to think, okay, there's now two competitors out there doing stuff that are competing for their numbers, and there's backlash, and there's reticence, and there's market shrinkage. So yeah,
I think
it's
that's
a
actually
whole new world.
a good run-off topic, right? So
Yep.
let's just talk about obstacles for getting your game funded on Kickstarter. Because obviously, I'm the expert at failing Kickstarters at this point. I think about it a lot. Obviously, I beat myself up a lot about the kind of things that I could have done differently. And I think kicking myself because things weren't immediately successful to my expectations obviously aren't helpful. And sometimes recognizing barriers that there's no way I could overcome is obviously stuff that can't be my fault, stuff that I can't solve. I think the competitors is a good one. We've got Kickstarter, but we've also got Indiegogo, GameFound, BackerKit, and probably a whole bunch of other similar stuff. Yep. As well as there's actually like a lot of subscriber sites, like Patreon, and then a whole bunch of clones that are specific to regions that these companies don't service.
Yes. Yep.
And I think that finding the correct financial model is going to match your market. And the advantage of Kickstarter is that it has a huge user base that don't know anything about you and might find you, right? And I'm starting to feel more and more like that's not helpful. I'm starting to think more and more that going to crowdfunding is mobilizing your existing audience.
Yeah.
And if you don't have an existing audience, you're not mobilizing anyone.
Yeah, I remember hearing something that nowadays, like the found you through Kickstarter is like under 5% of your backs, maybe 2%. So really,
whereas mine first campaign, it was like 45.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing.
This is 2019, right? This is before. This is 2018.
2018, yeah.
And I was like, wow, that is so many people. But also, like, the game was really, really low risk investment because it was pretty cheap.
Yep.
And it looked probably the most professional amongst all of my games, and people saw it and it did really, really well.
But that's I was going to say the variable you couldn't control there is it was 2018.
Yeah,
it's not going to be 2018 again.
No,
that's how time works.
Yeah, unfortunately.
And at the moment, there isn't, like, the excitement about being on Kickstarter and the excitement of buying Kickstarters was very big then. And until another platform comes along or something changes, that doesn't exist anymore. And
like, when are we going to get a publisher that just is Kickstarter but publishes your game? And they just go, is there interest for this in the crowdfunding? And then they go, okay, it funded, sick, your game is now published, we are going to manufacture it, we are going to fulfill it, it's in stores now, congratulations, you mobilized your fan base to get to this thing, other people that were already on our site and know our published products wanted this, bought it, bang, done. And then as a solo designer, like most of these people want to be, can just do that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
There
it's
are.
not 2045 either. That
That's
hasn't
right.
yet come to
That's right.
pass.
Um, and you may absolutely, just be might have the right product at the right time, at the wrong
Mm,
time, or something,
mm,
or something like that. Um, you might be a little bit early. That's
mm.
also happens as well. You can be like, like there was some people who were really getting into like app-based games about 5 years ago, and they just barely got their money back, or they just barely funded it, and then they kind of disappeared. And now you've got Lucky Duck doing a app-based games, and the audience is ready now, and they're
Mm.
just funding out the wazoo because everyone's like, oh yeah, I'm used to that now.
Yeah.
And that's so that's another example of something you can't control. You can be too late or too early.
Mm.
And there's a real limit to how much you control those kind of things. You also can't control, international um, pandemics and the effect on shipping.
No. Yeah, so shipping definitely a problem one. And I think that's maybe not as obvious as a barrier for some people because they go,
Yeah.
yes, it'll cost more for the backer or whatever, and that is a larger inherent price. People might have a problem with that. But also, it's like costs of sending the pallets to us,
Mm.
fulfilling locally,
Yep.
as opposed to, let's say, if I am part of a publisher that's already on the regular getting a lot of pallets shipped to me, is a lot different than me, a one-time Kickstarter creator. And like a lot of these other existing things. Fortunately for Castles of Calera, we just fulfilled from China directly. Like
Oh yeah, that's
they
good.
go up
Yeah.
to the post office and put the game in the post office box, and then it shows up at your house by interconnected series of wires, as I understand it.
Yes.
Um, and that's way easier than sending 16 pallets into different countries in the world into a fulfillment center, which is then being sent to, and like, this is a nightmare, honestly. And being able to just navigate that as a human being is a nightmare, let alone a person
Mm.
where that's not your skill set. One of the other big ones is that just the country that we're in. I genuinely think Australia is a huge handicap for this industry. There's
Absolutely.
like 80, maybe 100 of us, generously estimating, doing exactly this. Most of us are hobby designers. Very few games actually get published out of this country. The board game convention circuit is barren compared to the States. And just if I feel like if at this point I was just like, you know what, I am independently wealthy, thank God for that. But I was just born in the wrong country. I could fix that.
Yeah.
I could
Yeah.
just go to the States and continue doing what I'm doing. Go to all the conventions, show off all my
I
stuff,
mean,
do all that networking and stuff, and fix the problem.
there's a reason, like it's in every industry. Like we tell that they generally say to the actors in Australia, like if you really want to make a career of this, you pretty much have to move to the UK or the US.
Yeah.
And that's where there's enough density of the industry to make a living out of this. And
Or meet someone
um,
that will then, you know what I mean? Because I think networking is just as important
yeah,
as
you could make it a
anything
movie in
else.
Australia and then get a crossover or something, like,
Yeah.
or be cast by someone, if you're lucky. But yeah, there's geography is a huge factor.
Mm.
Uh, I remember, I'm old enough to remember before the internet, we had to rely on like people, our
Well,
friends
so am I, but I
buying things
didn't
for
really
us.
look up from my Game Boy at the time.
Yeah, but it was really tough with like in the early days of the internet as well. That like you could find out the Americans had all this stuff, but you couldn't get it. There'd be like
Yeah.
these games, especially like role-playing games, would cost like $25 in the US and then 120 in Australia because of all the shipping and the taxes and everything.
All of
And there
that
were
still
time,
exists, where you'll
yeah,
find that if you just did a currency conversion from AUD to USD, the prices are not the same. It's usually
yeah,
an
yeah,
extra 10, $15, maybe more, depending on where on everything. And that's because of shipping.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's better now, but it's we're always going to be paying more.
Mm,
And if you want to be working in the game industry, in the tabletop industry, you need to be in the US or Germany,
mm,
France, the UK. Those are the main centers. Um, I mean, I was talking to someone at DevCon, which is a tabletop developers con we have in every year, just before PAX, and they were from Ecuador, and they didn't have any game stores in their country. So, they had it worse than us in that regard.
Yeah.
They were like, we have a bit of we have some board gaming culture, but nobody sells it. We have to buy everything online, which
Yeah.
means there's no conventions, there's no meetups. There's just people playing in people's houses, and they're like, we're trying to be game designers, but we don't even have any stores to sell. So, there are
Mm.
certainly worse countries, but it's another example of geography is going to be an issue.
Well,
Where
I think
you
that's
live,
interesting,
yeah,
right? Like we're fifth on the podium. Let's pretend,
yeah,
and there's many more than 50 countries.
yep, yep.
All right, so there is going to be places where it is heaps worse than us, but that doesn't mean that we can't campaign to improve what we have,
That's right. Yeah.
to fight hard to support each other when it comes to building up the industry that we do have here.
Mm.
With stuff like DEF CON, I think DEF CON is great,
Yeah.
and a lot of those other kind of things to try and help each other. But I think recognizing what advantages your country has and doesn't have when it comes to the whole process is a whole learning experience on its own.
Yeah. You can't magically change your country. That is always going to produce certain limitations and barriers, but you can go, okay, well, what do we have? And what can we do with what we do have? We're close to Hong Kong and Asia, which can help as a printing hub. And as you said, sometimes you can send straight from there, and we can build up our local market. As I said, I started with very few Australian backers, and now I'm up to basically a third of my market, and we're getting a bit better, and we're trying to push that a bit. That's something I'm always talking to like convention goers and things like that, is about this idea of really supporting playing local games, and on content creators as well. Going, you should not just review, like, your average YouTuber content creator in Australia still mostly just goes, what are the 3 hottest games of the day? They don't have a segment where they look at an Australian designer or what's the latest Australian board game to come out, which is madness, that we should be doing more of that sort of stuff.
Yep.
As partly Australian culture, we have this thing called the cultural cringe, which sort of was a term that was coined in the 80s, which basically said that because we'd always sort of got our culture from the US or the UK, we kind of got this idea that our culture just kind of sucks because it doesn't come from one of the important places. And we've really, really internalized that. And that's the movie example. Whenever we made an Australian movie, we had to bring over a celebrity to be in it. Kirk Douglas had to be in the Man from Snowy River movies to make them cool, and we still do that kind of thing. We've got to go bring in the celebrity so it's okay, and then we know it's important. So we really could use more of that focus on local pride. You can barely get even computer games to be talked about in the mainstream press. Cult of the Lamb recently did so well that they actually mentioned it on there was a politicians in Victoria mentioned it in the House and the Parliament House about the success of the local industry, and it's like, well, that was a big breakthrough for someone to actually go, crazy. Hey, we made a game in Australia and somebody actually heard of it. But Cult of the Lamb is like, we've made lots of games. It just happens to be one that's really and we could definitely do a lot more about that and just go, let's it's like pretending all Australian movies are Mad Max. We've made other things.
I think that's interesting though, because let's say you've made Cult of the Lamb, you've made lots and lots and lots of sales, you've built lots and lots and lots of renown. I had no idea this was an Australian game.
Yeah, no, I didn't know either.
For a long time, until only really very recently. And I wonder, and I think part of the problem is that we're just under so much constant pressure to be doing things and generating stuff that it's hard to go, okay, we've had a success. Now, am I able to use this to not just platform myself, but can I platform other creators? Can I use this in a way to help other people get to that same thing? Because we proved it can be done. what can we do to help other people? And I just don't see it ever,
Yeah,
honestly.
look, it's and I think we could do more of it, but I also think it's hard because partly because we just don't have like we because we don't saying Cult of the Lamb is an Australian game as part of its identity, then it doesn't make sense for it to lift anything else up because it's like, well, everyone's going to go, well, do they involve cults or lambs? No, they don't, so I don't care. And yeah,
Yeah.
we've seen Phil Walker Harding started a new company which is all about Australia and Australian animals,
Mm.
and that's a little bit of something. We've tried to start the Kangaroo Awards, but it doesn't mean anything to anyone outside Australia. Um,
It barely means anything to anyone in Australia. Sorry to say.
yeah, no,
I've really only seen it walked through 1 year.
yeah.
And that was the first year that I had heard of it. I've barely heard about anything for it ever since.
I don't think it's going to generate more sales. That's the thing. If you told someone in Australia that it won a Kanga, they won't care. But if you tell somebody it won a Spiel des Jahres, they'll go, "Oh, of course, that's important."
Yeah, that's
Just you
true.
know, we don't care if like something wins an AFI award, but we care if it wins the Oscars. Again, we
Mm.
have this cultural cringe. We'd rather be recognized by America or by the UK or something. I
Well, I
mean, we
think
had,
even in that, how do we solve that problem, right? Because I think
yeah,
for the first part is that the local board game industry is unseen by anyone outside local board game industry. Then
mm,
the award process in the local board game industry is like a small corner of it, like maybe one or two people running this thing,
yeah,
right? And then how do we make it get beyond that rather than people just going, oh yeah, nice job, here's your sticker, and then the stickers on the box, and people go, oh, cool, they won an award, whatever. I'm still like that. I'm still like that with Spiel des Jahres. Like I already know what all these games are. I've never seen a game with a Spiel des Jahres stamp that I had not heard of before, like independently of that. Like if that makes sense. Like I didn't go,
mm,
oh, this game that I'd never heard of has a sticker on it. I will look at it. Where it's like I'm not going to see a Kanga sticker on something in Big W, you know,
mm,
Little Walmart, and go shit. That is a game I need to pay attention to. I would be more like, wow, what the fuck? I'm actually seeing a Kanga sticker in the wild, like.
yeah, yeah.
And I just really don't
Um,
know how to get that customer awareness of such a
mm.
thing when the
Well,
customer isn't aware of Australian games in general.
yeah, that's why I think it really needs to start with a lot of the content makers, like the people who
Mm,
make. There's now they didn't exist 5 years ago. They now exist. There's a lot of them. They're Australian based, and they could really be driving that home and going, let's focus on Australian content. Like if you remember Good Game, the ABC TV show about computer games, they spent a lot of time on Australian content.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but the local board game podcasts and stuff aren't doing that nearly as much. Um, and so we just don't even notice these things.
Mm,
Um, and it is a tough nut to crack. Um, yeah, we've got Matthew Dunstan has been nominated, I think, or maybe even won the Spiel des Jahres this year for Merchants of Guild of Merchant Explorers,
mm,
or nominated at least. Yeah, I don't think he won. I don't know the winner announced yet, but and that is again like that's one of the greatest achievements we've had in Australia, but it's not an Australian award, you know.
mm.
Um, and yeah, whereas like now, if you, it doesn't have to be like that because we're talking about other countries. If you look at the Japan, they have a pretty small board gaming industry comparatively, but they're really into the games that they make in Japan and they
Mm,
support the hell out of them. And they have a really interesting and big culture as a result. And then because of that, the people around the world have gone, oh, you've got to get this weird game that isn't like anything else.
mm,
Now, obviously, as a sort of British colony, ex-British colony, we're not going to be as unique as Japan compared to everyone else. But it would be amazing if we could have had, you know, I mean, but look at yeah, as I say, we don't have the branding. Blood on the Clock Tower, very popular game all around the world. Would you even know it's Australian? No, there's no part of it that is marked as, hey, this came from Australia.
even in all
Um,
of the in like art of the rulebook and stuff like that, it's um very like medieval UK kind of a thing, right?
yeah, yeah, and look,
Um, it's
I'm
hard,
pretty,
I guess, right?
I'm guilty of that too. My games tend to be very cinematic American sort of style. You know, like
Mm,
the score doesn't. it was almost called Ocean's 18 because Ocean's 11 is the American film,
Yeah.
um, and the answer isn't always to put kangaroos in everything, but uh, yeah, it's a tough puzzle, and it's something I think we have a whole part of Australian culture to do. You know, if the movies in Australia and the TV shows in Australia have trouble with this, of course our
Mm.
games are going to have trouble.
Mm.
But then you look at um, there is a game coming out about the Emu War, but then there's games about that. Um,
I think it's
uh,
interesting because video games, I think, have a much easier time breaching the digital landscape
mm,
than film,
yep,
which is crazy because on any streaming site it's normally fine. Except film has this weird licensing problem where it's like you
yep,
have to say yes to every single potential option, whereas in games you upload something to Steam and it's like unless if the from memory, when you upload something to Steam, you have to have it rated, like the GPG,
yep,
MMA, like
yep.
shit that we have here. A lot of other countries don't have such a unified method. Some of them are just like, is this going to fuck up my kid? And if you say yes, then they probably won't have it in that country. And stuff like Germany has like huge censorship. You can't have any kind of nudity in it. It just won't show up and stuff like that, right?
Yeah,
But other than
yeah,
that, it's pretty lax, right?
yep.
And you'd think that film would be able to break through by getting it onto a streaming platform because it's already pretty accessible. But board games doesn't have this thing. Board games has to physically show up in the country. But you could have like a digital adaptation that makes people want to get the physical one. I mean, I've literally never had that personal experience. Every physical game I've bought, I would rather the digital version. Like digital root is way better. Digital wingspan is way better than the physical one because it just removes a lot of mental load in how to play the game.
Well,
But
that's sorry, go.
it's just like how can we have that same market access that like
Yeah,
Steam that like digital games do that physical games just don't.
I think well, this comes back to innate limitations. Is that board games suffer from that? Like we're in an era where sending things digitally is king for and mediums that aren't that are suffering. You know,
Mm.
um, art galleries have had to pack up and move around the world to get to people, or you know, offer packages to like fly down to Melbourne to see this art gallery. Um, and board games, yeah, kind of caught in the middle of this because they're not digital. And
Mm.
in many cases, as you say, people would prefer them to be digital. And so companies are adding the reason why there's been a part of the reason why there's been all these Kickstarter extras is because people are going, well, if I am playing something physical, I want to have the whole world. You know, I want
Yeah.
it to be completely different and feel really
Yeah.
different. Um, and yeah, it could be that we're in a time of crisis with eventually board games are going to be just like, well, they either have to be. I think we've already seen a little bit of this. Is sort of the middle area of games may disappear a bit more. Games are going to be huge so that people feel like it's worth getting off the computer, or they're going to be
Mm.
small and compact, like Abandon All Artichokes or something, and
Mm.
go, yeah, if I'm going to play an RPG, if I'm going to play a board game, it better be simple and
Yeah,
quick and
I
fast.
I have a hunch that leaning more towards componentlessness
Yeah,
will
yeah,
be more common because games like D&D are doing really 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 well, and that game is just a book and some
yep,
notes that you
yep,
take. Blood on the Clock Tower is a similar thing. It's just a sheet, which is a reminder for what characters are going to be in this particular game that you're
yeah,
playing. And I think that the occasion, like the event
yep,
type game, is going to be the way to sell a product in the future. Like
yep,
the reason why games like TI4 and stuff are so popular is it's like that's the whole day.
yep.
Saturday is TI4.
And even if it's
Hopefully
only
we
once
finish
a
it.
yeah, even if it's only once a year, the game feels big enough to be like, hey, it's once a year. We get to play this, you know.
Yeah.
And it becomes this event. And I think you're right. Like that's why there's all these games that are like escape rooms in a box as well, because it's like, well, we play once a month. We need an event.
Mm.
So yeah, if you're out there designing, you know, one-off games, you know, and I think we're going to see an evolution of those things as well. Like the old version, Legacy was a bit like that because we play once Legacy.
Mm.
You buy one in the series or something.
Yeah, Legacy
Um,
had a good model to try and encourage you to get the game to table more often. But I think
yeah.
maybe rather than making it heavier with the intention of encouraging replay, I think there is a way to make games simulate something that is going on without necessarily having like the giant board, all these
Mm.
things. And like maybe because we see a lot of app integrated games that
Yep.
have the like half board, half app, but I haven't seen any app integrated games where it's like more like a social type game where there's things going on, but also the app has instructions or information or whatever on it, where it's just there to track or keep information. And I wonder if maybe that is the way of the future, or
Uh,
maybe something like that, like a
Given,
PNP that has an app
yeah,
attachment or something like that.
um, given the recent announcement from Apple of these fancy headdresses, it's possible that um, social deduction style and party games may be like not in the table, but in our headsets, right? Like,
Mm,
because a game like something with the complexity of Blood on the Cocktail, where you can change everyone's AR display, so you can look at someone and get some information from them.
mm,
That's something that doesn't need a table, doesn't need it, and it can all be software, but it plays very social. You still have to be in the room with everyone. So we might see, as you say, tables and structures disappearing, but um, social games going
mm.
onto our glasses. I mean, the very first thing I
Yeah.
played on like a set was Werewolf or something, and it's like, yeah, because they were having Werewolf with cards and stuff, and like,
Okay.
yeah, I can see that.
Hmm.
But also, they also then switched to Settlers. It's like, no, that's a dumb idea. um,
Yeah.
but I think, yeah, I think we're definitely in a time where technology and social change and economic models are shifting a lot. The game industry in general is always changing. I mean, we're saying 2018 was totally different from now. That's 5 years ago. 5 years
Hmm.
from now, it'll be completely unrecognizable again.
Hmm.
Um, and it's a really interesting time. And that's another barrier is that you don't know what's going to happen. You know, we started working on the score 2 years ago, and we didn't know that the shipping crisis would still be this bad and that money would be downturned. You have to pick your dates. You have to go with what you can do. Um,
Hmm.
and we thought make something really small to try and remove risk, which
Hmm.
did help. But we did want a bit more money than we got, and um, yeah, that means we might not be able to reinvest in the next project or whatever it is. They had to really. The bottom line, we just sort of shaved in and made enough money. But yeah, that there's that was we can only minimize risk. We can't remove it. And the industry is changing really fast.
Hmm.
And that comes back to like we were saying, if you're too early or too late, you can re-release the film, re-release the game. Maybe in 5 years' time, it will sell, and it will, or you'll be able to change it and
You've had
fix
more
it.
marketing, you've learnt more, you've changed things, you've upgraded stuff, you've built more of an audience. It's totally possible.
I found out that Michael Mann's film Heat, he actually made that film 10 years earlier with a
Hmm.
much smaller budget, with no name actors, but he made it for like 250,000 or something, and it got a little bit of attention, and but hardly anybody saw it. And then 10 years later, he was like, "Oh, I've made a few successful films now. I'm going to remake that exact film
Hmm.
the way I wanted to do it back then." So you know, it's that thing of don't throw anything away. Even if your Kickstarter didn't succeed or you only sold a few copies, 10 years, 20 years time, the market changes. Somehow you can digitalize it, and all of a sudden what's old is new again, and someone will buy it. Um, if you don't like where the industry is now, wait 3 years and see where it is then. It'll be
Yeah,
it'll be
because
different.
it's such a time commitment, right? Let's say from last episode, right? Everyone's
Yeah,
at their kind of playtesting and development stage. You go, okay, it's done. I've decided. Playtesting is
yeah,
complete. I have made the most fantastic game in the universe. But production isn't instant. a lot of artists working on stuff, graphic designers working on stuff, probably pre-marketing and stuff getting started. This all takes time. And then, like you said, 2 years for the score, and that's a small game.
Yeah.
All this stuff comes along, and then you are suddenly in a very different landscape. I've had people get halfway through production and another game was released with the same name. All this kind of stuff that could just happen to you, and you just have to be prepared to maybe drop something, maybe redo an entire thing, maybe do something completely different. Because I guess the job, right, is you are not an artist where you go, this is a canvas, I have put paint on the canvas, this is complete, here is your canvas. You are trying to create a product that 300 people will buy, basically, at the minimum, right? And if you can't collect 300 people, and if you can't convince 300 people to buy your thing, then it's not going to exist. You're using specifically the crowdfunding method. I kind of just wanted make 100 of something and just go to not a fate, a market or something, because we have pretty good markets culture here. Just go to markets and start selling stuff at markets.
My friend Sean did that with there was a make 100 challenge in the art group sort of and Etsy people, and that he made 100 copies of a sort of simple abstract game and sold them all at markets. And I have a friend who made 100. He self-printed 100 copies of a sort of a small book. And look, that's another way to get your message. It sucks not being able to traditionally publish the way that seems the coolest and the most talked about. And the most popular, Kickstarter Kickstarter is a good way to get crowdfunding. It has been historically. And it feels like an achievement because of that to successfully kickstart. But it's becoming harder and harder to thread the needle of competing with the massive Kickstarters who are spending several $100,000 on promotion and so we have to step back and go, okay, well, what is a different definition of success? Which is something we keep talking about on this. It's
we have mentioned it a few times.
Yeah, you have to figure out what is your definition of success and which definitions are you going to be happy with. We used to only have one model, and you had a chance, but it was a pretty crowded market. And 15 years ago there was much fewer publishers, and so you're just if you didn't have a great new Euro game, you were screwed. You could just or if you had something that was the new they were the only two options. Now we've got a huge amount of variety, lots of smaller publishers. There's a lot more different routes to getting published by other companies. And there's all this, as well as all the Kickstarter things. So,
I do want to pedal back for a second, though.
Yeah, sure.
I want to talk about the competition of the big company. So I think we've kind of run past it a few times. But what is becoming more and more the sentiment is that the average successful Kickstarter product is this big company that dumps lots and lots of money on marketing and pulls in millions of dollars. For example, Castles of Calera's first 48 hours saw the launch of the Batman miniatures game, which pulled in $1 million in the first 40 minutes or something ridiculous shit like that. And you look at that and you go, well, how can I compete? And sometimes, right, that those things are good because it validates that the platform has users on it, right? It will bring people to it, and then while they're looking at them, they might see you on the side panel or whatever and go, "Oh, this is also cool. I will buy that thing." So, them bringing an audience to it isn't bad. The thing lately that I've been seeing, which has become more and more of a problem and more of a barrier, is that the number one thing that sells games on Kickstarter is backer trust. And these big fucking companies are continually eroding backer trust to the point where the whole platform is negatively affected. More specifically, talking about stuff like Mythic, where they're just off the bat going, okay, look, actually, we're just going to charge you lots and lots of money. I've had lots of smaller creators do similar stuff, and it doesn't feel as disingenuous. But when you've pulled in over $1 million, it's a bit harder to go, hey, I need you to pay another half of the RRP again for this thing. And in some other ways that they've been doing it, or just walking away with everything and all this kind of stuff that we worry about. And I think that is also something that is worth considering. I try and put a lot of effort into making sure that I communicate as much backer trust as possible, but it's hard, right? It is hard.
It is. Yeah, and this is the part of this backlash thing, is that it's not just that people have ordered things that they don't want, it's they've ordered things that haven't showed up. As more and more big companies have thought, well, all we need to do is spend $200,000 on our advertising and we'll make $1 million. They haven't done enough of everything else. And so we've seen more and more spectacular failures and more backpedaling and more mistakes and controversies and things to make everybody just hesitate. And we I don't want to get into it because it's a very, very complicated topic about the people saying that reviewers were basically blackmailing them to get good reviews. We've created this other industry where there's this world of the content creators, and if you pay them enough money, you'll get attention. And so that's created a cycle where basically the more money you pay, the more success you're guaranteed. And when you get that sort of situation, you get more and more people who are just not doing the work. They're not putting in the quality. They're not putting in the time. They're just there to make money, which means that there's more con artists, there's more fail to deliver, there's more mistakes. And that, as you say, erodes everyone's confidence. I mean, I've had so many people say to me, like, hey, I've got this new Kickstarter, and they're like, oh, yeah, I don't back them. They never come, things like that. And I back something and they never turn up. And I was like, I've fulfilled all of my Kickstarters, either on time or before time. But that's becoming the rarity now. That's becoming, people are going, well, that never happens.
I've not had any no-shows. I've, on my account, backed over 180 projects, but very often I just throw in for the $1.
Yeah.
The $1 pledge. My most recent delivery was Floating Floors, an Australian game. I did make a
great
video
Australian
on that.
talent. Yeah.
And that's the thing is, now whenever I see some local talent putting their game up on Kickstarter, I'm like, yes, I would like one. Give me game. And any other time, I'm just like, yeah, use it all.
Yeah, and maybe we should probably.
Who really has that mindset, right? Like, who's really just like that? It's an Australian board game. I want it. Like, I just don't think that exists as a thing. Please, if you're, just get in the comments and prove me wrong and show off your Australian board games collection. But I just genuinely don't think there's enough people like that.
Maybe we should. Yeah, I think that would really be great for the industry if there was just like huge spotlight on Australian designers and Australian collections, and just going Australian, I'll watch it. And there is a little, like we talked about, there are people who will as soon as there's an Australian movie in it, they'll love it. But there isn't that in the board gaming industry. There's a little bit of it maybe in the video game industry, where talk about like when Goose Game came out, they were like, that's Australian, let's go and play it, But we could use a little bit more of that.
Some expos put a lot of effort into showing off these products.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And yeah, PAX does a little bit of it. Like PAX Rising tries to really sort of throw behind local companies. We're getting there in some ways. It was great to see that at the last PAX with just the row of PAX Rising for tabletop.
Yeah, that was really good. There should be more stuff like that. Some more showcasey type stuff. Because basically PAX has set up a ramp kind of a thing from concept to complete. And a lot of that stuff is very heavily weighted on our end from the before complete, and then everything in the category of complete is like the retail stores that they have, and then the games library. It would be interesting to have stuff like the showcase section, but for like, this is an Australian board game that has done really, really well. You can either get a copy and play with your friends in the library, or a person who will run demos of it for you. And the intention is not to sell a product. The intention is to showcase Australian talent. I think that everything that exists in conventions in Australia is to make money. And I think the collaboratory is maybe the only thing that's not like that, because these are people that are like, maybe if you like it, I will make money in the future. And it's still pretty fucking close, but that's unfortunately incredibly motivated that way. And it would be really interesting to just have, even if it was like a timesheet where it's rotated and showed off different stuff, but like, here's a whole bunch of different specific Australian talent content.
I think the game library at PAX now has an Australian section. Like last year, I think they brought that in. Like, we eventually talked their arm around to these are games locally designed, but they get all mixed up and everything, and there's not a lot of interest. But it would be good.
This is a fantastic thing to hear, and my instant reaction is, do I have any games in there? I know I have games in the PAX library. Do they know that my games are Australian and belong in there?
I'm trying to think. I'm pretty sure I saw Castles of Calera in there. Yeah.
Belongs in there.
But yeah, it would be good to just have, like, I mean, you have to. It's one of those things where it's chicken and the egg. Like, if you went, I can see those people who run the library going, "What cares if we set up a special store with just the Australian games? They'll all just push past us and go and get whatever the latest thing is. They'll go and get Earth or something like that."
Yeah,
but if you did that, you would slowly educate the market, and they might change. And then, so
it would be interesting to have, like you mentioned before, with this Spiel des Jahres winner. Here is an Australian game that was very successful overseas. That's kind of the center of that Venn diagram. I think it's really interesting, right? Because we have. Let's say that operates to the best it possibly could, right? Because when we have PAX, which is then like, check out these cool Australian games, versus, unfortunately, Etencon, I'm going to be mad at you again, Etencon, which was like, check out these games that haven't been checked out or played in 3 to 4 years. And I'm like, okay. Including, unfortunately, one of mine. And I think that was not necessarily the way to promote such a thing, but it would have been really cool to have, hey, this is an Australian convention. Hey, here's some really cool Australian games that are underloved, or we recommend, or all these kind of things. And I think that there's lots of ways to be showcasing other stuff. And I think also with the PAX Rising thing, there needs to be creators and people around need to get in the habit of their flowchart of things, right? Normally, the end of the flowchart is to convert to sale with, here is how to find all my shit, here is how to give me your money, because it might not necessarily be, here's the FBOSS machine. But it should also have the next thing of, here's what you should do next while you're here at the convention. My friend at the store next to me has this really cool game that I've been wanting to play all weekend, but can't because times where I'm free, they're busy. Talking about Aethermon, and I got a tattoo, and I didn't even get to play their game. And stuff like this. Like, if your natural conversation is like, hey, you're done here, that's the next thing. It helps keep the interest there, helps keep stuff going. If people are running the library and someone is looking and not sure, they go, hey, have you tried out this thing? It's blah, 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 blah. You know what I mean? I don't know, regular librarian shit. But I think it's important for us to try and encourage people to participate in the things that we do already have, and encourage people to like move down that conveyor belt onto the next thing and prop up the other people that we have there. And some of that comes from knowing those things. It's been
know your colleagues, know your industry.
8 months since PAX. We had the score. We had Aethermon, which was next to me. We had my table, which wasn't super great. I remember there being a Western gunslinger game where I went and met those people. There was a whole bunch of guys that had dice in a cup. That was really cool. They had their own little shelf thing with a whole bunch of different games of dice in a cup that you could play. there was I can't remember the name of the game. I have their sticker literally on my computer. 219 guys, which were really cool, that had like a not trick taking. It was more like a take daddy kind of thing, but you were trying to become the king amongst all of these other dwarves and stuff like that. And then like the list goes on, right? Drift was there. Drift was also super busy. I didn't get to fucking play that game either. I've only played it online, which is deeply frustrating for me.
Oh, yeah.
And then here's me. I spent an hour maybe before the doors opened, because we're allowed in early. Went around, talked to as many people as I can, familiarize myself with as much as I can, so that when I catch something in body language, or I realize the person is doing the, hey, what's my closing dialogue? People do this a lot, right? Me, an incredibly autistic person, goes to the supermarket. I'm patiently waiting for them to say I'm allowed to leave after making a purchase. It's the same thing, right? You've run the demo, people are going to have that, okay, that was a really nice interaction, I'm going to leave now, moment where there's this big window of where you can go, hey, have you actually seen Drift? That game looks really sick. Here's the 3 facts that I memorized about this game to convince you want to play it. Or over here is the score. You know, my good friend Steve Dee has been super busy running this game all weekend, and if you're really lucky, you can get a seat and play this. You know what I mean? Like, being the hype man for everyone else there, I think is also important.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's hard, I guess. I don't know. I don't see many people doing it.
I think it's very easy to get to get too focused on your own thing and not connect to the wider industry. And that's a really important thing to do, to just be good at trying to raise everyone else's boats and stuff. And I think in a country where we are limited, when we, you know, if you actually see this again in other industries, people in the film and TV industries are often just trying to help each other out and go, oh, now I'll get you, push this thing over there and plug that person, and we could do a lot better with that in games. I think because we sort of don't think enough as designers about the local industry, because we're just looking at, well, I want to publish to America, and we're looking over there instead of going, well, we should look at all of us and how do we raise all of our boats. And so we started talking about Kickstarter. We ended up talking a lot about the limitations of being in Australia.
Because there's a lot, I'm angry about it constantly.
Look, it's not the best. Well, Melbourne is probably the best city if you are in Australia, but it's not a good place to be born if you want to be successful in certain industries. It's
in arts, in general, I think.
Yeah,
it's hard.
Stand-up comedy, movies, television. Sometimes you have to just put the money down. And I know some people who spend all their money, instead of promoting their games, they spend it flying to America or to Essen every year and trying to sell them directly that way. Because it's just get there physically if you can.
Yeah, because I think that next step is really important. Being there at Gen Con, being there at Essen, and being in the room where the conversation happens. Like, being able to do that in-person networking and get people to know what your face looks like, I just think is insanely valuable. And it hurts if we can't do it that efficiently.
That might be a good thing to do in the future, though. If you are a designer who isn't Australian and want to come on and talk to us about what it's like in your industry.
Give me some Ecuadorian game designers. Give me some Taiwanese game designers. I want to hear about it. I want to hear about the unique struggles of your little country.
The Southeast Asian people have their own unique issues, and I know a bunch of them. So maybe, and there'll be now time slot, which is also helpful. So I'll see if I can get one of those on for.
That'd be cool
in the future.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
All right. And we'll keep talking about. We'll keep talking about crowdfunding and barriers, because, as you said at the start, identifying the barriers is really important, to not be too harsh on yourself. To go, look, I cannot control everything. I cannot become a millionaire. I cannot change where I was born or what year it is.
I cannot become a millionaire if I was not already a multi-millionaire.
That's right.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, one of the earliest jokes they told me in game design was how do you make a small fortune in game design? Well, you start with a
Mm.
big fortune.
Mm.
Um, um, so yeah, but barriers exist. We do what we can, and hopefully this has answered some of your questions. And keep sending us in your questions, and we'll keep answering them if we can.
That's the dream. That's the goal of the day-to-day dev podcast, is to talk about some of this stuff. Because I feel like there isn't a lot of visibility about these kind of things. I feel like a lot of Australian people maybe watching this may not have considered some of the things that we've talked about maybe in this episode or previous episodes. And the hope is that we can help people get on to that same kind of wavelength that we're sitting on when we're encountering these problems or learning these new things. I want to, share glimmers just as much as gripes if we can.
Yes.
But I am also a grumpy person, and that is hard for me. But once again, I am Keith Franks of Cutlass Board Games. This is Steve Dee of Tin Star Games, and we're trying to make games on the daily.
See ya.